You'll serve my family like hired help and dress up like a proper Indian for entertainment, my daughter-in-law Belle demanded, so I smiled sweetly and agreed. What she didn't know was I'd found her secret letters calling me the old Indian woman who could be manipulated into selling my ranch. While she panicked about her arriving relatives, I rode to town where the sheriff was waiting with fraud evidence. That evening, her own family watched in horror as I exposed every lie, every scheme, every racist plot she'd hatched. Her millionaire uncle disowned her, instantly calling her a disgrace to their name. When Belle begged for mercy, I said, "You had 3 years to show respect. Now you have 3 minutes to pack." She thought she was destroying a powerless widow, but I was the one holding all the cards. Was I wrong to destroy Belle's life so completely? Should I have shown mercy when she called me the old Indian woman? Tell me, when someone tries to steal your heritage, how far is too far for revenge? I am Abigail, a 58-year-old Comanche-Scottish rancher who destroyed my manipulative daughter-in-law's life with one perfectly planned revelation. The December dawn broke cold and clear over our land, painting the rolling hills in shades of gold and amber. I stepped onto the wooden porch of our main house, breathing in the crisp air that carried the scent of winter grass and the promise of rain. Our cattle stirred in the distance, their breath creating small clouds in the frosty air. Walking to the corral, my boots crunched on frost-covered ground. This ranch has been our family's heart since 1875, every acre earned through sweat and sacrifice. My heritage runs deep in this Texas soil. My mother was full-blooded Comanche. My father, a Scottish settler who learned to respect both the land and its original people. Thomas understood this when he married me, and together we built something sacred here. As I checked the water troughs and counted our horses, I offered my morning prayer the way my mother taught me, acknowledging the spirits of this place and asking for wisdom. It's kept me grounded through every challenge, every loss, every moment when running this ranch alone seemed impossible. "Morning, Ma!" Samuel's voice came from behind me. My 32-year-old son appeared leading his horse, already dressed for work despite the early hour. He's grown into a good man, though sometimes too trusting for his own good. His wife Belle has been testing that gentle nature for 3 long years. "You're up early even for ranch time," I observed, noting the tension in his shoulders. Samuel tied his horse to the fence and removed his hat, running fingers through his dark hair, his father's gesture. "Belle's got news she wants to share. She's pretty excited about it." My stomach nodded. Belle's excitement usually meant trouble for everyone else, especially me. Since marrying Samuel, she'd made it clear she viewed ranch life as temporary, something to endure until she could drag my son back east where she belonged. "What kind of news?" I asked, dreading the answer. Boot heels clicked against wooden steps. Belle emerged onto the porch in one of her impractical Eastern dresses, blonde hair perfectly arranged even at this ungodly hour. Everything about her screamed city sophistication and barely concealed contempt for our way of life. "Abigail," she called in that artificially sweet voice reserved for when she wanted something big. "Could you come in for coffee? I have the most wonderful news." Samuel and I exchanged glances. His apologetic expression told me he already knew what was coming and wished he could spare me. The knot in my stomach pulled tighter. Belle stood on that porch with a gleam in her eye I'd learned to fear. The same look she'd worn when demanding we hire Mexican workers instead of doing the work ourselves, when insisting we needed proper china for her friends' visits, when suggesting Samuel deserved better opportunities than ranch life. "This should be interesting," I muttered, having no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. That moment when you know someone is about to ask for something huge, but you can't escape the conversation. We've all been there. "Tell me about a time when family put you in an impossible position." I followed Belle into our kitchen, the heart of our ranch house, where Thomas and I had shared countless morning coffees and evening conversations. The room still held his presence. His favorite chair by the window, the wooden table he'd built with his own hands, the cast-iron stove that had warmed our family through countless Texas winters. Belle poured coffee from the pot I'd prepared before dawn, her movements deliberate and theatrical. She'd arranged herself at the head of our table as if she owned the place, which I suspected was exactly how she saw things. "Abigail, I have the most exciting news," she began, clasping her hands together with that practiced smile. "My entire family is coming for Christmas, all 25 of them." I nearly choked on my coffee. 25 people. Oh, yes, my parents from Boston, my three sisters and their families, my uncle Marcus, who made his fortune in railroad investments, my cousins from Philadelphia, everyone. They're all so eager to see authentic Western life. The way she said authentic dripped with condescension, as if our way of living was some sort of theatrical performance for Eastern entertainment. Samuel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Belle, we should have discussed this with Ma first. Nonsense. Belle waved him off. Family doesn't need permission to visit family. Besides, I've already sent the telegrams. Uncle Marcus is bringing his new wife. Apparently, she's fascinated by Indian culture. Her eyes flicked to me with barely concealed disdain. I told them all about your background. The knot in my stomach turned to ice. The way she said background made my Comanche heritage sound like something shameful to be whispered about rather than the proud lineage it was. And naturally, Belle continued, you'll handle all the preparations, the cooking, cleaning, serving. You know how these things work. I'll be far too busy entertaining and showing them around the ranch. They'll want to hear stories about Indian raids and cattle rustlers and all that frontier nonsense. Frontier nonsense. She'd just dismissed the life Thomas and I had built, the struggles we'd overcome, the culture my mother had passed down to me as nonsense, suitable only for Eastern tourists seeking cheap thrills. Belle, I said carefully, setting down my coffee cup, 25 people is a considerable undertaking. When exactly are they arriving? 3 days from now. Isn't it wonderful? Christmas Eve will be perfect. A real Western Christmas with all the traditional fixings. You'll need to slaughter at least 2 steers, and I want that special cornbread you make and plenty of that wild game stew. Oh, and you'll need to clean the bunkhouse for the overflow guests. She rattled off her demands as if I were hired help rather than the woman who owned this land. Every word revealed her true feelings, that I existed solely to serve her vision of Western hospitality while she played the gracious hostess. And, of course, she added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, you'll want to dress appropriately. Maybe wear some of those Indian beads or something. Uncle Marcus's wife would find that terribly authentic. That was the moment something inside me crystallized into cold, hard resolve. She wanted me to dress up like a carnival performer to play the role of the exotic frontier woman for her family's amusement. She wanted to turn my heritage into a costume party attraction. I stood slowly, meeting her expectant gaze with steel in my own. Perfect, I said, my voice calm as winter morning. It sounds like a wonderful celebration, Belle. You'll handle everything beautifully. Her smile faltered. What do you mean? I mean, I'm heading to town for the holidays. You can manage your family gathering yourself. When Belle expected me to dress up like a carnival performer for her relatives' amusement, something inside me snapped. Have you ever reached that breaking point where you couldn't take another moment of disrespect? What was your final straw moment? The silence that followed my announcement was so complete I could hear the kitchen clock ticking and the distant lowing of cattle in the far pasture. Belle's face had gone from rosy confidence to ash-pale shock in the span of a heartbeat. What? What do you mean you're heading to town? She stammered, her carefully composed Eastern accent slipping slightly. You can't just leave. I've already promised everyone a proper Western Christmas experience. Then you'd better learn quickly how to provide one, I replied, pouring myself another cup of coffee with steady hands. Inside, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in years. The peace that comes from finally standing your ground after too long bent beneath someone else's will. Samuel cleared his throat uncomfortably. Ma, maybe we could work something out. Belle didn't mean any disrespect about your heritage. I turned to study my son's face, seeing Thomas's gentle nature warring with something that looked suspiciously like relief. Had he been hoping someone would finally stand up to his wife's demands? Didn't she? I asked quietly. She wants me to dress up like a traveling show performer, Samuel. She called our life frontier nonsense and expects me to slaughter cattle and clean bunkhouses for people who see me as entertainment. Belle shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. That's not what I meant at all. I was trying to include you to make you feel important. By turning my mother's teachings into a costume party. Belle's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed genuinely at a loss for words. Ma, Samuel said carefully, where exactly are you planning to go and for how long? I smiled, and something in that expression made both of them shift uneasily. I have business in town that's been waiting too long. As for how long? I shrugged. That depends on how things work out. What they didn't know, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I'd been making my own preparations for months now. Ever since I'd discovered certain documents hidden in Samuel's desk drawer papers that Belle thought she'd concealed so cleverly. Bills from Eastern dress shops, correspondence with land speculators, and most damning of all, a letter to her uncle Marcus describing the AA ranch as prime development property and suggesting ways to convince the old Indian woman to sell. The old Indian woman, that's how she referred to me in her private correspondence. Belle began pacing the kitchen like a caged wildcat. This is impossible. Uncle Marcus is already on the train from Boston. My sisters have arranged childcare. Everyone has made plans. Then perhaps you should have consulted the person whose home you were volunteering before making those plans, I said mildly. But where will everyone sleep? What will they eat? I don't know how to cook for 25 people. Belle's voice rose to a near shriek. I imagine you'll figure it out. You're a resourceful woman. At least that's what you told Samuel when you convinced him to marry you. Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly at that. Good. Maybe he was finally starting to ask himself some questions about his wife's true nature. Ma, this seems awfully sudden, he said slowly. Are you sure there isn't something else going on here? I met his gaze steadily. My son was sharper than Belle gave him credit for. There's always something else going on, Samuel. The question is whether folks are paying attention. Belle stopped pacing and whirled to face me. Fine. What will it take money I can pay you for your services? Pay me. For cooking in my own kitchen, cleaning my own house, serving guests in my own home. The audacity took my breath away. Belle, I said softly, there isn't enough money in your uncle's railroad fortune to buy what you're asking for. Have you ever reached that breaking point where you just couldn't take one more day of disrespect in your own home when someone treated you like hired help while plotting behind your back? What was the moment you finally said enough is enough and walked away? I left the ranch within the hour, riding my mare Estrella toward town with the morning sun warming my back. The familiar rhythm of her hooves on the hard-packed earth helped settle my mind as I planned my next moves. Belle and Samuel's voices had followed me from the house, her shrill protests mixing with his confused questions. But I'd simply saddled up and ridden away without another word. The town of Cedar Crossing sat nestled in a valley where two creeks met a growing settlement that served ranchers and farmers from miles around. As I rode down Main Street, I nodded to familiar faces. Mrs. Henderson hanging laundry behind the general store, old Pete sweeping the front of his saloon, the blacksmith already working his forge despite the early hour. But I wasn't heading for any of the usual businesses. My destination lay beyond the town proper, where a small camp had been established by the creek. Chief Standing Bear and several families from his band had been granted permission to settle there after years of negotiation with the territorial authorities. It was an arrangement that worked well for everyone. The Comanche provided skilled horse trading and tracking services, while the townspeople offered protection and trade opportunities. I found Standing Bear sitting outside his lodge working on a bridle with the patient precision that marked all his crafts. At 55, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen his world change completely, yet managed to adapt without losing his essential nature. His weathered face looked up as I approached, and recognition sparked in his dark eyes. Abigail, he said in accented English, setting aside his work, you ride with purpose today. I dismounted and accepted his gesture to sit beside him on a fallen log that served as his outdoor workbench. I need counsel, Uncle, I said using the respectful term my mother had taught me. Standing Bear nodded slowly. He'd known my mother well. They'd been childhood friends before the world split them onto different paths. Your spirit is troubled. Tell me what weighs on your heart. I explained Belle's demands, her casual dismissal of our heritage, her secret plans for the ranch. Standing Bear listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave as I described her letter, referring to me as the old Indian woman. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring at the flowing creek. Finally, he spoke. Your mother's daughter shows in your eyes today. She too had fire when justice was needed. What would she have done? She would have remembered that wisdom often looks like cunning to those who lack it. He turned to study my face. You have a plan already. You seek not advice, but blessing. I smiled, recognizing the truth in his words. The spirits of our ancestors don't approve of disrespect. No, he agreed solemnly. And they protect those who honor the old ways while walking the new paths. He reached into a leather pouch at his side and withdrew a small object, a carved piece of turquoise wrapped in sinew. Your mother gave this to me when she married your father. She said to keep it until her daughter needed the strength of both worlds. I accepted the amulet with reverent hands, feeling its smooth warmth against my palm. Thank you. There is more help available than you know, Standing Bear said quietly. Doc Henderson has spoken of your son's wife and her Eastern ways. The banker Morrison has questions about certain inquiries regarding your land. Even Sheriff Collins has heard whispers. My eyebrows rose. I hadn't realized Belle's activities had attracted such attention. The community sees more than city people believe, Standing Bear continued. When the time comes for truth, you will not stand alone. My mother's turquoise amulet gave me the courage to fight back, but I wonder, was I right to involve the whole community in exposing Belle's schemes? When someone tries to destroy your heritage, how far should you go to protect what matters most to you? I returned to the AA ranch near sunset, my mother's turquoise amulet warm against my chest and my resolve stronger than ever. The scene that greeted me was exactly what I'd expected and exactly what Belle deserved. 3 wagons sat haphazardly in front of our house, their occupants milling about in obvious confusion. Eastern voices carried on the evening air, filled with complaints about the long journey and questions about accommodations. Belle stood in the middle of the chaos, her perfect hair disheveled and her fancy dress stained with what looked like flour. Uncle Marcus, I can explain, she was saying to a tall, stern-faced man in an expensive suit. There's been a misunderstanding with the arrangements. Misunderstanding. A sharp-voiced woman in traveling clothes stepped forward. Belle, you promised us a proper Western experience with authentic hospitality. Instead, we find you in a panic with no food prepared and no rooms ready. I dismounted slowly, letting Estrella graze while I observed the unfolding disaster. Samuel emerged from the house carrying an armload of blankets, his face flushed with embarrassment and exhaustion. He spotted me, and relief flooded his features. Ma, thank God you're back. Belle's family arrived early, and your mother abandoned us in our time of need. Belle interrupted, her voice shrill with desperation. She knew perfectly well that 25 people were coming, and she chose this moment to go gallivanting around town. Uncle Marcus turned to study me with calculating eyes. You must be the mother-in-law Belle has told us so much about. I must say your hospitality is quite different from what we were led to expect. I walked calmly toward the group, noting how they instinctively parted before me. These Eastern folks might think they knew about Western ways, but they recognized authority when they saw it. Welcome to the AA Ranch, I said with genuine courtesy. I'm Abigail. I'm sorry to hear there's been some confusion about your visit. Confusion? The sharp-voiced woman, one of Belle's sisters from her resemblance, stepped forward aggressively. Belle assured us you were eager to host us, that you'd prepared everything for a traditional Western Christmas celebration. I smiled pleasantly. Did she? How interesting. And what exactly did Belle tell you about our family's traditions? Belle's face went pale. Ma, please not now. Oh, I think now is the perfect time, I continued, my voice carrying clearly in the evening air. Especially since your Uncle Marcus seems so interested in our property and its development potential. The silence that followed was profound. Uncle Marcus's face shifted from confusion to sharp attention. I'm not sure what you're implying, Mrs. Just Abigail will do fine. And I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I reached into my saddlebag and withdrew the papers I'd discovered weeks ago. Facts that I think your family should know before they spend Christmas under our roof. Belle lunged forward. Those are private papers. You had no right. I had every right to investigate when I found correspondence in my own home discussing the sale of my land without my knowledge or consent. I held up the letter with Belle's handwriting clearly visible. Particularly correspondence that refers to me as the old Indian woman who needs to be convinced to sell. The gasps from Belle's family were audible. Uncle Marcus's expression darkened considerably as he recognized the implications. Belle, he said slowly, what exactly have you been telling people about your situation here? I was just exploring options for our future, Belle stammered. Samuel deserves better than this isolated ranch life. Better, I asked quietly. Better than the land his father died protecting. Better than the heritage his grandmother passed down. Or just better than having to respect the woman who owns it all. Have you ever caught someone plotting behind your back using your own home against you? That moment when you realize the person living under your roof has been secretly working to destroy everything you've built. How did it feel? What would you have done in my position when Belle's mask finally came off? Uncle Marcus snatched the letter from my hands, his face growing darker with each line he read. The other family members crowded around him, their excited chatter about Western adventures dying into horrified silence as they absorbed Belle's true words. "The old Indian woman can be managed," Marcus read aloud, his voice dripping with disgust. "Her sentimental attachment to the land makes her vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Once Samuel understands the financial opportunities convincing her to sell should be straightforward." He looked up at Belle with contempt. "You wrote this about the woman whose home you're living in." Belle's face had gone from pale to gray. "Uncle Marcus, you don't understand the full situation." "Oh, I understand perfectly." He waved the letter in the air. "You've been lying to your family, disrespecting your host, and plotting to steal her land. What I don't understand is how I raised a niece capable of such deceit." One of Belle's sisters stepped forward, her earlier sharpness now turned toward Belle. "You told us Abigail was eager to sell, that she was too old to manage the ranch properly. You said she'd practically begged you to find buyers." "I never said begged," Belle protested weakly. "You said she was a burden," another relative chimed in. "You said keeping her comfortable was straining Samuel's finances and that selling would benefit everyone." Samuel had gone very still during this exchange, his face cycling through emotions I recognized: confusion, hurt, and finally a dawning anger that reminded me powerfully of his father. "Belle," he said quietly, "is any of this true? Samuel, darling, you have to understand." "Is it true?" His voice carried a steel I hadn't heard since he was a boy standing up to bullies. Belle's composure finally cracked completely. "Yes, all right. Yes, it's true, but only because I love you. You deserve so much more than this isolated ranch life. You could have a real career in Boston, a proper house society connections. Instead, you're stuck here playing cowboy while she pointed at me with undisguised venom, controls everything with her backward Indian ways and her stubborn attachment to worthless land." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the cattle seemed to have stopped lowing in the distance. Samuel stepped closer to his wife, his voice deadly calm. "Worthless land. This ranch has been in our family for 15 years. My father built it from nothing. My mother has kept it running since he died. It's our heritage, our legacy, our home." "It's a prison." Belle spat, her mask finally off completely. "And she's the warden, keeping you chained here with guilt and sentiment." Uncle Marcus folded the letter with sharp, precise movements. "Belle, you will pack your belongings immediately. Our family will not stay another moment under this roof after such shameful behavior." "But where will we go? The hotel in town is full because of the Christmas travelers." "That is no longer my concern." Marcus turned to me with genuine remorse. "Mrs. Abigail, I offer my family's deepest apologies. Belle's behavior is inexcusable, and her lies to us make us unwitting participants in her disrespect." I nodded graciously. "Apology accepted, Mr. Marcus. You weren't to know." "What about Samuel?" Belle asked desperately. "He's my husband." All eyes turned to my son, who stood looking at his wife as if seeing her for the first time. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority that had been missing for 3 years. "Samuel is a grown man who can make his own choices," he said slowly, "and right now Samuel chooses to stay home and help his mother prepare for a proper Christmas celebration." As if summoned by the evening wind itself, the sound of approaching horses echoed across our land. Belle's head snapped up with desperate hope. Perhaps reinforcements from town, someone who might salvage her crumbling situation. But as the riders came into view, her face fell further into despair. Chief Standing Bear led the group, sitting tall and dignified on his painted horse. Behind him rode Doc Henderson, Sheriff Collins, and Banker Morrison, 3 of Cedar Crossing's most respected citizens. They'd come not as casual visitors, but as witnesses to what Standing Bear had undoubtedly sensed would be a moment requiring community authority. "Evening, Abigail," Doc Henderson called out as they dismounted. His weathered face took in the scene. The loaded wagons, the scattered Eastern relatives, Belle's tear-streaked desperation, and Samuel standing protectively near me. Heard there might be some trouble out your way. No trouble, Doc, I replied calmly. Just some family matters getting sorted out. Sheriff Collins, a lean man with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing, stepped forward. Mrs. Belle, he said formally, I believe we need to have a conversation about certain inquiries you've been making regarding property transfers and land valuations. Belle's remaining color drained completely. I don't know what you mean. I think you do, Banker Morrison interjected, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by stern disapproval. You've been asking questions about Mrs. Abigail's financial situation, her will, and the procedures for selling ranch land. Questions that suggested you had authority you don't possess. Uncle Marcus stepped forward, his businessman's instincts recognizing official scrutiny when he saw it. Gentlemen, I assure you my family had no knowledge of any improper activities. We came here under false pretenses, believing we were invited guests of a prosperous ranching family. We understand that, sir, Sheriff Collins nodded respectfully. Our concern is with Mrs. Belle's activities over the past several months. Activities that have raised questions about her intentions regarding this property. Chief Standing Bear spoke for the first time, his accented English carrying the weight of ancient wisdom. In the old days, when someone tried to steal another's land through lies and manipulation, the whole tribe would gather to witness the truth. Today, the community serves the same purpose. Belle suddenly found her voice shrill and desperate. This is ridiculous. I'm being persecuted for trying to improve my family's situation. Samuel, tell them how your mother has kept you trapped here, how she refuses to let you build a real life. Samuel looked at his wife with something approaching pity. Belle, the only person who's been keeping me trapped was you. Trapped in your lies, your schemes, your complete disrespect for everything I hold dear. But Samuel, we could have so much more. More than what? Samuel's voice grew stronger with each word. More than honest work. More than land that's been in our family for generations. More than the respect of our neighbors and the blessing of living where my father is buried. Doc Henderson cleared his throat. Mrs. Belle, there's also the matter of the debts you've incurred using Samuel's name without his knowledge. The general store, the dress shop, several other businesses in town. They've been asking questions about payment. Belle's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Even Uncle Marcus was staring at her now with complete disgust. How much? Samuel asked quietly. Near on $400, Morrison replied. All charged to accounts she claimed you'd authorized. $400. Nearly a year's profit from our cattle sales. Samuel's face went white, then red with anger. I never authorized any such thing, he said through gritted teeth. Sheriff Collins nodded. We figured as much, which brings us to why we're here. He turned to Belle with official authority. Mrs. Belle, you have 3 choices. You can work out payment arrangements for these debts, you can face charges for fraud, or you can leave Cedar Crossing permanently and never return. Belle looked around desperately at the circle of faces, her own family's disgust, the community's judgment, Samuel's newfound resolve, and my quiet satisfaction. For the first time in 3 years, she had no manipulation, no scheme, no way to twist the situation to her advantage. This isn't over, she whispered, but even she didn't sound convinced. Standing Bear smiled grimly. Yes, it is. The next hour passed like a fever dream of justice finally served. Belle, faced with the choice between fraud charges and permanent exile, chose the latter with what little dignity she had left. Her family watched in stony silence as she gathered her belongings, their earlier excitement about a Western Christmas replaced by shame at their association with her schemes. I'll need help loading my trunk, Belle said to Samuel, her voice small and defeated. Samuel looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. No, Belle. You got yourself into this situation. You can get yourself out of it. Uncle Marcus stepped forward, his face carved from granite. Samuel's right. Belle, you've brought disgrace on our family name. We'll provide transportation back to the railroad station, but after that you're on your own. But I'm your niece, I'm family. Family doesn't lie, steal, and manipulate, one of her sisters said coldly. Family doesn't plot to cheat widows out of their land or forge their husband's signature on store accounts. Belle's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time they looked genuine rather than calculated. Samuel, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can work this out. We can start over somewhere else. Samuel's expression softened slightly, and for a moment I feared his gentle nature might override his newfound backbone. But then he looked around at the ranch, the land his father had died protecting, the home I'd maintained through 5 years of widowhood, the community that had rallied to support our family's honor. "Belle," he said quietly, "I loved the woman I thought I married. But that woman never existed, did she? You've been playing a role for 3 years, waiting for the chance to cash in on what you thought was coming to you." "That's not true." "It is true." Samuel's voice grew stronger. "You never loved this ranch, never respected my mother, never even tried to understand what this life meant to me. You saw dollar signs where I saw heritage. You saw obstacles where I saw family." Belle's composure cracked completely. "Fine. Keep your precious ranch and your backward ways. See how far your cattle and your Indian traditions get you in the real world." The racial slur hung in the evening air like a poisonous cloud. Chief Standing Bear's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight tightening around his eyes that indicated deep offense. Doc Henderson actually took a step back as if Belle's words had physically struck him. Samuel's face went white with fury. "Get out," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Get out now before I forget I was raised to be a gentleman." Sheriff Collins moved closer to Belle, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. "Ma'am, I think it's time you finished your packing and moved along. The community's patience with your behavior has reached its limit." Belle threw her remaining belongings into her trunk with vicious energy, her earlier tears replaced by bitter rage. "You'll regret this, all of you, when Samuel realizes what he's given up for this worthless piece of dirt, when he sees what his life could have been." "What life?" Samuel interrupted. "A life built on lies and stolen money. A life where I had to be ashamed of my heritage and apologize for my family." "No thank you, Belle. I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and corrupt." Uncle Marcus supervised the loading of Belle's trunk onto one of their wagons with the efficiency of a man eager to distance himself from scandal. "Belle, you have 1 hour to reach the train station. After that, if you're still in this territory, you'll be dealing with the sheriff's fraud charges." As the wagon carrying Belle disappeared into the gathering dusk, a strange peace settled over the ranch. Her eastern relatives followed in their own conveyances, offering brief, embarrassed apologies before departing for more respectable accommodations in town. Doc Henderson was the first to break the silence. "Well, that was quite a show. Abigail, I believe you handled that situation with remarkable grace." "Grace?" I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Doc, I've been planning this reckoning for months. Grace had nothing to do with it." Sheriff Collins chuckled. "Remind me never to cross you, ma'am. You've got a strategic mind that would make a cavalry officer proud." Standing Bear approached me with that slight smile that indicated approval. "Your mother would be proud. You fought like a warrior, but with wisdom instead of weapons." Samuel stood quietly beside me, his arm around my shoulders in a gesture he hadn't made since Belle entered our lives. "Ma, I owe you an apology. I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you instead of letting her treat you like hired help." I patted his hand gently. "Son, sometimes we have to learn hard lessons about the people we love. The important thing is that you learned." As the last wagon disappeared down our road, Banker Morrison cleared his throat. "Now then, about those debts Belle incurred. The merchants in town are willing to write them off as a community service given the circumstances. Nobody wants to see Samuel punished for his wife's crimes." The relief on Samuel's face was visible even in the fading light. "Thank you. All of you. I don't know how to repay such kindness." "You repay it by being the man your father raised you to be," Doc Henderson said simply, "and by taking better care of your mother. That," Samuel said firmly, "won't be a problem anymore." 3 days later, our ranch buzzed with activity that felt entirely different from Belle's frantic demands. This was the genuine warmth of community coming together, the kind of celebration that grows from respect rather than obligation. "Mrs. Abigail," called out Mary Henderson, Doc's wife, as she climbed down from their wagon with a basket covered in checkered cloth. "I brought my cornbread recipe and enough ingredients to feed an army. Figured you might be ready for some real Christmas cooking." Behind her came the Kowalski family from the neighboring spread, their 3 children racing toward our corral to admire the horses. Jan Kowalski carried a freshly butchered turkey, while his wife Anna balanced a covered pot that smelled of herbs and simmering vegetables. "We heard Belle's family couldn't stay for Christmas. Anna said with a diplomatic smile that didn't quite hide her satisfaction. Thought you might enjoy some company that actually appreciates good hospitality. Samuel emerged from the barn where he'd been working since dawn, his face bright with genuine happiness for the first time in months. Ma, looks like we're going to have that Christmas celebration after all. The right kind of celebration, I agreed, watching as more wagons appeared on the horizon. Word had spread through Cedar Crossing about Belle's departure, and the community's response was heartwarming. These weren't people coming to be entertained by authentic Western life. These were neighbors coming to share in the joy of family restored. Chief Standing Bear arrived on horseback leading 2 pack animals loaded with supplies. His weathered face showed the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from him in years. The women of my band send gifts, he announced, dismounting with fluid grace despite his age. Sweet grass for blessing the house, dried berries for your Christmas feast, and he reached into one of the packs and withdrew a beautiful beaded shawl. This belonged to your mother. I have kept it safe, waiting for the right time to return it. My breath caught as I recognized the intricate patterns my mother had worked during the long winter evenings of my childhood. The beadwork told the story of our family, symbols for strength, wisdom, and the harmony between earth and sky that she'd always said was the secret to a good life. She would want you to wear it when teaching the next generation, Standing Bear continued, glancing meaningfully at Samuel. When grandchildren come to learn the old ways alongside the new. Samuel's face reddened slightly, but he was smiling. Well, I suppose I'll have to find the right woman first, someone who actually loves ranch life instead of seeing it as something to escape from. There's no hurry, I said, wrapping the precious shawl around my shoulders and feeling my mother's presence like a warm embrace. Good things come to those who wait for the right reasons. Sheriff Collins arrived with his family, followed by the Morrisons from the bank and several other families from town. Soon our yard looked like a small festival with children playing between the wagons while adults organized the impromptu feast. Abigail, Doc Henderson said, approaching with a steaming cup of coffee. I have to ask, did you really plan all of this? Belle's exposure, the community response, even the timing? I accepted the coffee, gratefully inhaling its rich aroma. Not all of it, Doc, but I learned a long time ago that sometimes you have to create the conditions for truth to emerge. Belle created her own downfall with her lies and greed. I just made sure the right people knew about it at the right time. Remind me to stay on your good side, he chuckled. You've got a mind like a steel trap and the patience of a saint. Not a saint, I corrected. Just a woman who finally got tired of being taken for granted in her own home. As the afternoon progressed, our impromptu Christmas celebration took on a life of its own. The women organized a magnificent feast from the contributed dishes, while the men helped Samuel with some long overdue repairs around the ranch. The children played games that mixed Anglo and Comanche traditions, supervised by Standing Bear, who seemed to enjoy his role as cultural teacher. You know, Samuel said, joining me on the porch as we watched the festivities. This is what Christmas should feel like. Not the stress and performance Belle always demanded, but this warmth, community, family. Your father would be proud, I said softly. He always said the measure of a man wasn't what he could take, but what he could give. Today you've given me back my faith in family. Samuel squeezed my hand. I'm sorry it took me so long to see what was right in front of me. Belle was so good at making me feel guilty for loving this place, for wanting to honor Dad's memory by keeping the ranch going. She preyed on your good nature, I replied. But good nature tempered with wisdom is even stronger. You'll be a better man for having learned these lessons. As the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice finally served. This was how Christmas was meant to be celebrated, with gratitude, community, and the knowledge that sometimes the hardest battles are won not with weapons, but with patience, wisdom, and the unshakable certainty that truth will always prevail. As the last wagon disappeared into the purple twilight, Samuel and I sat on the porch steps watching the stars emerge in the vast Texas sky. The ranch felt different now, not just peaceful, but purposeful. The weight of Belle's manipulations had lifted like morning fog, leaving behind the solid foundation of what our family had always been meant to be. Ma, Samuel said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. I need to ask you something that's been weighing on my mind. I settled my mother's shawl more securely around my shoulders, feeling the strength of generations in its intricate beadwork. Ask away, son. How long did you know about Belle's schemes, her lies, all of it? I considered my answer carefully. Samuel deserved the truth, but he also deserved to understand the deeper lessons embedded in our recent trials. I suspected something was wrong about 6 months after you married her, but I didn't have proof until I found those documents 3 months ago. 3 months, Samuel's voice held a note of pain. You knew for 3 months and didn't tell me. Samuel, if I had simply shown you those papers without Belle revealing her true nature, what would you have done? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the cattle settling down for the night. I would have made excuses for her. I would have believed her explanations. I would have convinced myself that you were being unfair. Exactly. You had to see for yourself who she really was. You had to choose between her version of your future and the truth of your heritage. If I had forced that choice prematurely, you might have resented me for the rest of your life. Samuel nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. You let her hang herself with her own rope. I created the conditions for truth to emerge, I corrected gently. Belle's greed, her disrespect, her fundamental inability to value what we've built here, those were all her choices. I just made sure those choices had consequences. The sound of night birds calling to each other across the darkness filled the space between us. In the distance, I could hear the gentle lowing of our cattle and the whisper of wind through the oak trees that had stood sentinel over this land long before any of us arrived. There's something else I need to tell you, I continued. Something about the future of this ranch and what it means to carry on your father's legacy. Samuel turned to face me fully, his expression serious in the starlight. I'm listening. When your father and I first came to this land, we made a promise, not just to each other, but to the land itself and to the people who had cared for it before us. We promised to be stewards, not just owners, to respect the old ways while building something new. I gestured toward the camp where Chief Standing Bear and his people lived. Your father learned from the Comanche that land isn't something you possess. It's something you belong to. That's why Belle's schemes could never have worked even if she'd succeeded in manipulating you. This ranch doesn't exist to make us wealthy. We exist to serve it, to protect it, to pass it on better than we found it. Samuel was quiet, absorbing the weight of this responsibility. And you think I'm ready for that? I think what happened these past few days proves you understand what really matters. When Belle offered you what she thought was a better life, money, status, escape from the isolation of ranch life, you chose heritage over convenience. You chose family over profit. You chose truth over comfortable lies. Standing up, I walked to the porch railing and looked out over the land that had shaped my adult life. But there's more to stewardship than just keeping the ranch running. There's the matter of cultural continuity, of making sure the lessons your grandmother taught me get passed on to the next generation. What do you mean? I turned back to face my son, seeing Thomas's strength in his posture and my mother's wisdom beginning to dawn in his eyes. I mean that someday when you find the right woman, someone who loves this land for what it is, not what it could become, you'll need to teach your children about both sides of their heritage. The Scottish determination that helped your grandfather carve a life from wilderness, and the Comanche wisdom that taught us how to live in harmony with the land. Samuel smiled, the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from him in years. Belle used to say that mixing cultures was confusing, that children needed a clear identity to succeed in the modern world. Belle was wrong about many things, but she was especially wrong about that. Mixing cultures doesn't create confusion, it creates strength. It gives you more tools to face whatever challenges life brings. Your father understood that when he married me, and it's why our marriage was so strong. I want that, Samuel said simply. Not the marriage necessarily, not yet, but that understanding, that connection to something bigger than myself. I reached into the pocket of my dress and withdrew a small object, a piece of carved bone that had belonged to my grandfather, a Comanche warrior who had lived to see the end of the old ways and the beginning of the new. This was given to me when I married your father. It's meant to be passed down when the next generation is ready to carry the responsibility of our family's legacy. Samuel accepted the carved bone with reverent hands, understanding the significance of the moment. What does it represent? Continuity. The idea that we are part of something that began long before us and will continue long after we're gone. Your children will learn about their great-great-grandfather who fought to protect his people's way of life, and their great-grandfather who learned to build bridges between different worlds. As if summoned by our conversation, Chief Standing Bear appeared at the edge of our porch light, moving with the silent grace that had made him legendary in his warrior days. "The spirits are pleased tonight," he said simply. "The land feels the return of harmony." I smiled, knowing he was right. For the first time in 3 years, the AA Ranch felt like home again, not just a piece of property to be managed, but a sacred trust to be honored. "Thank you, Uncle," I said, "for everything. For the blessing, for the wisdom, for helping me remember who I am." Standing Bear nodded gravely. "You never forgot. You just needed to remember that sometimes the greatest battles are won by those who know when to wait and when to act." As he melted back into the darkness, Samuel and I sat in comfortable silence, each lost in our own thoughts about the future that stretched ahead of us, a future built on truth, respect, and the unshakable foundation of family loyalty properly understood. The morning after our profound conversation dawned clear and cold, with frost sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. I woke before sunrise, as had been my habit for decades, but this time I felt a lightness in my chest that had been absent for far too long. The house felt different, not just peaceful but purposeful in a way it hadn't since Thomas's death. Samuel was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, coffee brewing and breakfast preparations underway. The sight of my son taking initiative in domestic matters, something Belle had always dismissed as beneath him, filled me with quiet pride. "Morning, Ma," he said, looking up from the bacon he was frying. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night, and I have some ideas I'd like to run by you." I poured myself coffee and settled at the table, noting how natural it felt to have Samuel taking care of me for once instead of the other way around. "I'm all ears." "First, about the ranch operations. I think we've been too isolated, too focused on just getting by instead of really thriving. What if we partnered more closely with Chief Standing Bear's people? They know horses better than anyone, and we have the grazing land and facilities they need." The suggestion showed a maturity I hadn't seen in Samuel since his marriage. Belle had always insisted that business partnerships with those people would hurt their social standing. Now, freed from her narrow prejudices, Samuel was thinking like the rancher his father had trained him to be. "That's an excellent idea," I said. "Standing Bear mentioned just last month that they need better winter pasture for their breeding stock. We could work out a partnership that benefits everyone." Samuel's face lit up with enthusiasm. "And there's more. Doc Henderson was telling me about a new veterinary program starting up in Austin. They're looking for ranches willing to host students who want to learn about cattle medicine. We could be part of that, maybe even get some of the latest treatments for our herd." I smiled, seeing Thomas's innovative spirit emerging in our son. "Your father always said the best ranchers were the ones willing to learn new methods while honoring old wisdom." "Exactly. And speaking of old wisdom," Samuel paused, seeming to gather his courage, "I want to ask Standing Bear if he'd be willing to teach me some of the traditional tracking and hunting skills. Not just for practical reasons, but because I want to understand that part of my heritage better." The request touched something deep in my heart. For years, Belle had made Samuel feel ashamed of his mixed heritage, constantly pushing him toward what she called respectable pursuits. Now he was actively seeking to reclaim the parts of himself she had tried to eliminate. "He would be honored to teach you," I said, "but be prepared. Comanche teaching methods are different from what you're used to. There's a lot of listening, watching, and patience required." "I think I'm ready for that kind of learning," Samuel replied seriously. "Belle always wanted everything to happen quickly to show immediate results. But the best things, like this ranch, like family relationships, they take time to build properly." As if summoned by our conversation, the sound of approaching horses reached us through the morning air. Looking out the window, I saw Chief Standing Bear and 2 of his younger warriors riding toward our house, their breath visible in the cold air. "Looks like the universe is giving you a chance to start that learning today," I observed. Samuel straightened his shoulders, and I could see him mentally preparing to approach Standing Bear with the respect and humility appropriate for requesting such an honor. This, too, was growth. The old Samuel, influenced by Belle's arrogance, might have assumed his request would be automatically granted. We met our visitors on the porch, where Standing Bear dismounted with his usual fluid grace. His weathered face was serious, but I caught the hint of approval in his dark eyes as he studied Samuel's respectful posture. "We come with a proposal," Standing Bear announced without preamble. "The Tribal Council has been discussing the future of our people in this changing world. We need allies who understand that progress and tradition can walk the same path." I felt a thrill of anticipation. This sounded like exactly the kind of partnership Samuel had been envisioning. "We're honored that you'd consider us as allies," Samuel said formally. "What did you have in mind?" One of the younger warriors, a man named Swift Eagle, whom I'd known since he was a boy, stepped forward. "We propose a formal alliance. Your ranch provides winter pasture and breeding facilities for our horses. In return, we provide training and traditional skills, help with cattle management during roundup season, and protection during times of trouble." "Protection?" I asked, curious about what specific threats they might be anticipating. Standing Bear's expression grew grave. "There are rumors from the territorial capital, talk of new laws that would restrict native movement for sales of tribal lands. If such troubles come, it will be better to face them with strong allies than to stand alone." The political implications were sobering, but they also reinforced the wisdom of the partnership Samuel had suggested. In uncertain times, communities that supported each other were more likely to survive and prosper. "There's more," Swift Eagle continued. "We propose that this alliance include cultural exchange. Your son learns our traditional ways, and some of our young people learn modern ranching methods. Both communities become stronger." Samuel looked at me with excitement barely contained. "Ma, this is exactly what I was hoping for. A way to honor both sides of our heritage while building something new." I studied the faces of our visitors, seeing in them the same combination of respect for tradition and openness to change that had made my marriage to Thomas so successful. This was what true partnership looked like. Not the exploitation Belle had attempted, but genuine mutual benefit based on shared values. "I think this alliance would honor both your father's memory and your grandmother's teachings," I told Samuel. Then, turning to Standing Bear, I added, "We accept your proposal with gratitude and respect." Standing Bear nodded solemnly, then surprised me by breaking into a rare smile. "Your mother would be proud. She always said that the strongest trees were those with roots in two different soils." As we began discussing the practical details of our new partnership, I felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. Belle had tried to force Samuel to choose between his heritage and his future, never understanding that true strength came from embracing both. Now, with her negative influence removed, Samuel was free to become the man he was always meant to be, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of traditions, and a builder of new possibilities. The AA Ranch was about to enter a new chapter, one written by people who understood that progress and tradition could indeed walk the same path, creating something stronger than either could achieve alone. 1 year later, standing on the same weathered porch where Belle had once made her outrageous demands, I marveled at how completely our world had transformed. The December morning air carried sounds I'd never imagined possible. Children's laughter mixing English and Comanche words, the gentle whinnying of prize horses in expanded corrals, and the satisfied lowing of cattle in pastures that now stretched twice as far as they had a year ago. The AA Ranch had become something Thomas and I had only dared dream of during our most optimistic conversations. What started as a simple cattle operation had evolved into a thriving community where two cultures worked together in perfect harmony, creating something stronger than either could have achieved alone. "Ma, the Austin veterinary students arrive next week," Samuel called out, approaching from the barn with the confident stride of a man who'd finally found his true purpose. At 33, he carried himself with the quiet authority that came from understanding both his heritage and his responsibilities. "Swift Eagle has prepared a special program combining traditional horse medicine with modern veterinary techniques." I smiled, remembering Belle's dismissive comments about our backward partnerships. The irony was delicious. Our alliance with Chief Standing Bear's people had made us more prosperous than we'd ever been. Our horses were now sought after from Kansas to Louisiana, and our cattle bore the healthy stamp of animals raised with both scientific knowledge and ancient wisdom. "Doc Henderson mentioned his niece Sarah will be visiting from San Antonio," I said casually, watching Samuel's face redden with embarrassment. "Apparently, she's quite interested in ranch life and cultural preservation." "Ma, your matchmaking efforts aren't exactly subtle." Samuel laughed, but his eyes held genuine warmth. "At 69, subtlety is a luxury I can't afford," I replied. The truth was, my confrontation with Belle had taught me the value of directness when it came to things that mattered. Patience had its place, but so did decisive action. Chief Standing Bear emerged from the lodge we'd built near our eastern pasture, where he now lived as our permanent cultural advisor and partner. His presence had brought a completeness to our land that I hadn't fully understood until it happened. This was how the earth was meant to be stewarded, by people who honored its history while building its future. Running Wolf has been accepted to the Territorial School in Austin, he announced with quiet pride. He will be the first from our band to receive formal education while maintaining his cultural identity. The news filled me with deep satisfaction. This was what true progress looked like. Not the destruction of one way of life for another, but the blending of different strengths to create something new and better. Thomas would have loved to see this day, I said softly, watching a red-tailed hawk circle overhead, his favorite bird, the one he'd always said represented the marriage of earth and sky. Samuel settled beside me on the porch steps, a daily ritual that had become precious to both of us. Ma, I need to tell you something. I want to change our ranch's name, not completely, but to honor what we've built here. What did you have in mind? His eyes brightened with vision and purpose. The AA Harmony Ranch, because that's what we've created, a place where different worlds come together in perfect harmony. Tears pricked my eyes as the rightness of the name settled over me like a blessing. Harmony. That was exactly what my mother had taught me, to value what Belle had tried to destroy and what Samuel had learned to create. Our ranch now employed 12 people full-time, both Anglo and Comanche workers, who had learned to blend their approaches into something more effective than either tradition alone. We'd gained recognition across the territory, but more importantly, we'd built a legacy that would endure long after I was gone. As we sat in comfortable silence watching our expanded community begin another productive day, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from a life well lived and a truth finally vindicated. Belle's betrayal had been painful, but it had also been necessary, a catalyst that forced us to examine our values and build something better than what we'd had before. The AA Harmony Ranch would stand as a testament to the power of patience, wisdom, and the unshakable belief that truth given time and courage will always prevail. The second Christmas after Belle's departure dawned with a soft glow over the Texas plains, the kind of light that feels like forgiveness. Frost shimmered on the pasture fences, and the longhorns stood motionless against the golden horizon. From the porch of the AA Harmony Ranch, I watched the smoke from our chimneys rise straight into a windless sky. For the first time in many winters, peace didn't feel fragile, it felt earned. Inside the main house, the scent of cedar and baked bread filled every corner. Samuel was in the kitchen humming quietly while stirring a pot of venison stew. He'd grown into a man of both strength and grace, his father's steady hands, and my mother's quiet wisdom guiding each of his choices. The boy who once doubted his place between two worlds had become the bridge holding them together. Outside, laughter carried through the cold air. Children from both the Comanche camp and nearby ranches were decorating the big juniper tree near the barn, mixing red ribbons with turquoise beads, pine cones with eagle feathers. Chief Standing Bear stood watching them, his lined face warmed by pride. He had become not just an ally, but family, an elder whose presence reminded us daily of the sacred trust we shared with the land. As the sun climbed higher, visitors began arriving. The Hendersons, the Kowalskis, the Morrisons, all carrying dishes and gifts, greetings, and good stories. They no longer came as polite guests to be entertained by Western authenticity. They came as equals, as kin, bound by shared labor, mutual respect, and the memory of what it had taken to get here. When I stepped inside to greet them, someone placed a warm shawl around my shoulders, the same gray-blue Cherokee piece I'd worn the night Belle left. Over the year, I'd embroidered new patterns into it, symbols for harmony, justice, and endurance. It had become a living record of survival, one stitch for every lesson learned. After the meal, the music began, fiddle tunes mingling with the rhythmic drumbeat of Comanche dances. No one asked where one culture ended and the other began. Children switched languages, mid-sentence laughter rising in both tongues. Watching them, I realized this was what my mother had dreamed of, a world where heritage wasn't a burden but a blessing. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the stars returned to their rightful places, I sat by the fire with Samuel. He handed me a letter written in careful script. "It's from the State Agricultural Bureau," he said. "They want to recognize AA Harmony as a model of cooperative ranching. They're sending a journalist from Austin next month." I smiled. Your father would have loved that. He always said progress without respect was just another form of destruction. Samuel nodded, his expression thoughtful. I still think about Belle sometimes, he admitted quietly. Not with anger, just wondering what might have happened if she'd understood what we were building. Some people see land as profit, I said gently. Others see it as belonging. She never understood the difference. We sat in silence, watching the flames dance. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of a coyote, lonely but not sad. Life out here had always been about cycles, loss, renewal, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. When Samuel finally stood, he placed my mother's turquoise amulet back into my palm. Keep this for now, he said. When I have children, you'll know when it's time to pass it on. I closed my fingers around the stone, its warmth pulsing like a heartbeat. The world had changed, but its spirit endured through us, through the land, through every act of quiet defiance that turned pain into legacy. As dawn's first light touched the horizon, I whispered a prayer my mother once taught me in Comanche May. Our roots run deep enough to hold, and our branches wide enough to shelter. The AA Harmony Ranch had become more than a home. It was proof that even after betrayal and loss, love and justice could still take root and bloom again beneath the endless Texas sky.